Hi, I'm Abolore. Today's lesson is about the concept of demand. And this topic was actually suggested by one of our students online. Also, to some of you watching, you might want to do the same, and we'll be glad to grant your request. So without much ado, let's get down to business as usual. Demand. The quantity of good or service consumers are willing and able to buy at various prices and per period of time. So demand simply means to buy. And for a commodity to have demand, such consumers must have willingness, ableness, and must be related to per period of time. That means how many units of that commodity is a consumer able to buy per day, per week, per month, per year, and all that. So in defining demand, you must retain some of the key words there. Quantity, which is also the unit. The willingness must be there. That's the readiness. The ableness, that's the financial capability of the consumer. And at various prices and per period of time. And also, demand can either be effective or ineffective. Demand is said to be effective when the consumers have the willingness together with the ableness, which means the consumer must have the financial muscle to buy the goods. And on the contrary, demand can be ineffective. The ineffective means not effective, and that means the consumers only have the willingness, but not ableness. So in that case, the consumers cannot buy the commodity in question. And ineffective demand is most common during inflationary period when prices of goods and services rise almost every day, every week, every month. And in such a period, ineffective demand will be very rampant. That means will be most common. That's during inflationary period. So that's with respect to the definition of demand. So let's come down to the law of demand. You can see I put here normal laws of demand. The normal laws of demand was first used by Alfred Marshall in 1890 in one of its textbooks it published, Principle of Economics to be precise. And this law is actually premised on the phrase ceteris paribus. That means all other factors that could affect demand are held constant or unchanged. So with this law, we will have price quantity demanded to have inverse relationship. And the law is stated thus: the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, ceteris paribus, and the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded, ceteris paribus. So when price of a commodity is high, it is a warning signal for the consumers to buy less. And when the price of a commodity is very low, it is a positive signal for the consumers to buy more. So this law basically is actually drawn for the poor in the society because the poor are price sensitive. Although the rich can, buy at any given price of a commodity, because this law is not for the rich, it's for the poor. Because the rich can afford to buy any given commodity at any given prices because they have money and wealth. So with this law, we have the quantity demanded for a commodity to be determined by the price of the commodity in question, if this ceteris paribus assumption holds. So here, the price is the independent variable, while the quantity demanded is the dependent variable. So independent variable determines dependent variable. That means dependent variable are determined by independent variable. Because ordinarily there are lots of factors that affect the demand for a commodity, but when we get there, we talk about that. So this law of demand, like I said, is the normal laws of demand and is premised on the concept of ceteris paribus, or phrase of ceteris paribus, which means all things being equal, or all other factors that affect demand are held constant. Now, this normal law of demand is most times helpful and useful in drawing our demand schedule and our demand curve, which we have here. So this is individual demand schedule for a consumer called Bobby, who is in the habit of buying petrol. And we are going to be drawing the demand curve for these consumers as well. So demand schedule is basically drawn also on the concept of ceteris paribus, which means all of the factors are held constant. So demand schedule is a tabular representation showing the list of prices and quantity demanded for a commodity. So this is the behavioral pattern of a typical consumer who buys when the price is very low and who buys more when the price of the commodity is very low, and who buys less when the commodity price is very high. So with this demand schedule, we can draw our individual demand curve for Bobby. So this demand curve is a graphical representation of the demand schedule. So it shows the graphical relationship between the price of the commodity and the quantity demanded for that same commodity. So let's plot this demand schedule here. So we are going to be plotting the prices against the respective quantity demanded for this commodity, petrol in question. So when the price is 0, we are assuming here, because it's kind of unrealistic, this is a case of free goods where you don't have to pay to buy the goods or to consume the goods. So hardly would you see the price of economic goods being 0. So this is a case of free goods. So as the price rises, it buys less. Okay, it buys less. So let's plot these prices against the respective quantities. So when the price is 0, it buys 50. So we have it, 50. We asterisk it, 50. When the price is 1, it buys 40 units. So we trace it, we have 40. When the price is 2, it buys 30 units. So we have 30. When the price is 3, it buys 20 units. And when the price is 4, it buys 10 units. And lastly, when the price is 5, it buys 0 units. So we are going to asterisk it. So let's trace these asterisks, and that will give us demand slope. So all these points, let's label these, all these asterisks, let's label them A, B, C, D, E, and F. So Alfred Marshall called these points, all these points, demand points. He called them demand points. And they show the respective price-quantity combination. At each asterisk, there is a relationship between price and quantity relationship or combination, whichever way. So this slope is downward. This slope simply illustrates the law of demand because the slope of it is negative. It's downward sloping. And that downward sloping means it's negative. And the fact that it's negative illustrates the normal laws of demand. So this slope is called the movement along the demand curve. That means it shows the quantity of the commodity the consumer consumes at respective prices. So these movements along the demand curve can either be downward or upward. Downward movements in the demand curve means increase in the quantity demanded, and that is called expansion or extension, and that occurs as a result of the fall in the price of the commodity in question. Also, this is upward movement, from here upward. Upward movement means decrease in the quantity demanded, and that is primarily responsible by increase in the price of the commodity in question. So decrease or upward movement is called decrease in quantity demanded, and it is also called contraction. We call it contraction. That means there has been a reduction in the quantity demanded of that same commodity due to increase in the price of the commodity in question. And downward movement means there has been an increase in the quantity demanded for that commodity due to fall in the price of the commodity in question. And decrease in the quantity demanded for a commodity is also called expansion or extension. So with this you have, like I said, the demand curve slopes negatively. It slopes downward from left to the right, or it slopes upward from right to the left. Whichever way you want to look at it, it's still the same. So that's with respect to the movement along the demand curve. So this is the movement along the demand curve, and that is primarily responsible by the change in the price of the commodity in question. So it is worthy of mention that demand curves are not stationary. That means they shift to the right or to the left. And that means when the ceteris paribus assumption or phrase is dropped, then we have all other factors to affect the demand for a commodity. So when we have the demand curve to shift to the right or to the left, we call it change in demand. And change in demand curves is primarily responsible by non-price determinants. Most economists call them external factors. So when all these external factors are allowed to affect, or one of them changes, then the demand curve will shift either to the right or to the left. So shifting the demand to the left or to the right is called change in demand. And change in demand, like I said, can either be to the right or to the left. When there is a change in demand to the right, it means increase in demand. You can see from here to here, that's increase in demand. From 20 to 30, that's increase by 10 units. And decrease in demand, that's leftward shift or inward shift. So from 20 to 10, that's decrease in demand. And this increase or decrease in demand is primarily responsible by non-price determinants or external factors. They are independent of the price of the commodity in question. That means the price of the commodity in question remains constant while the demand for that commodity increases or decreases. So let's get to explain each of these factors one after the other. Substitute goods. With respect to substitute goods, we want to take a look at how will the change in the price of one substitute goods affect the demand for another substitute goods. So what are substitute goods to start off with? Substitute goods are goods that can be used in the place of another. They are competitive goods. They are rival goods. So how will the change in the price of one affect the demand for the other? So let's take a good example of perfect substitute. We have Coke. Coke versus Pepsi. How will the change in the price of Coke affect the demand for Pepsi? So decrease in the price of Coke, ceteris paribus, will make Pepsi to be less competitive, and that means people will buy Pepsi more. That means the demand for Pepsi will decrease as well. That will decrease. Decrease in the price of Coke means Pepsi will be less competitive, will be less price competitive, and that means the demand for Pepsi will decrease as well. Ceteris paribus. On the contrary, and that means the demand for Pepsi will shift to the left. When Coke reduces its price, the demand for Pepsi will shift to the left, and that will lead to decrease in the demand for Pepsi, and that means the demand curve for Pepsi will shift to the left. On the contrary, when the price of Coke increases, ceteris paribus, the demand for Pepsi will increase as well, ceteris paribus. That means when the price of Coke increases, Pepsi will be more price competitive. That means more people will go for Pepsi as a result of the increase in the price of Coke, because they serve the same purpose, they give the same satisfaction. So this relationship with respect to substitute goods is said to be positive, because increase in the price of one, ceteris paribus, will lead to increase in the demand for another substitute goods. So increase in the price of Coke will lead to increase in the demand for Pepsi, and that will shift the demand curve for Pepsi to the right, and that's increasing the demand for Pepsi. So you can see here, the price of Pepsi does not change. It is the price of Coke that changes, or that changed, and as a result, the demand for Pepsi also changed. That's with respect to substitute goods. So the relationship between substitute goods is positive, because increase in the price of one will lead to increase in the demand for another substitute good, ceteris paribus. Complementary goods. Complementary goods are goods that are bought together. They are jointly demanded. That means when you buy A, you must buy B. So a good example of complementary goods like we have car versus petrol. So how does the change in the price of car affect the demand for petrol? So let's say the fall in the price of car, ceteris paribus, will lead to rise in the demand for petrol. That means when the price of car falls, more people will buy car. And as a result, that's many people will need to power their car with petrol. And as a result, the demand for petrol will increase. Without the change in the price of petrol, the demand for it changes. And on the contrary, when the price of car rises, ceteris paribus, that will lead to fall or decrease in the demand for petrol, ceteris paribus. So, fall in the price of car will lead to rise in the demand for petrol, and that will shift the demand for petrol to the right. And on the contrary, when the price of car rises, then ceteris paribus, that will lead to fall in the demand for petrol, and that will shift the demand curve of petrol to the left, and that's decrease in the demand for petrol. So the relationship between these two goods, called complementary goods, is said to be negative, because decrease in the price of one, ceteris paribus, will lead to increase in the demand for the other complementary goods. So that's with respect to that. Income versus wealth, or income and wealth. Let me strike a difference between these two confusing words. Income. Income means the sum total of your wages, salaries, profits, dividend, and so on and so forth in a given period of time. And it's usually computed per month, per year most times. So wealth. Wealth means the difference between what you own minus what you owe. So your wealth most times is called your net worth. So how does income affect the demand for a commodity? Income, with respect to income, we are going to be explaining that using two types of goods. We have normal goods versus inferior goods, or normal goods and inferior goods. How does income affect normal goods? Normal goods are goods that when income increases, their demand also increases. That means it will shift the demand curve to the right. And when income decreases, their demand also decreases. That means whichever way income goes, normal goods also goes. And a good example of normal goods, we have restaurants, meal, designer clothes, holidays, abroad, and all that. So the relationship between income and normal goods is said to be positive, because increase in the income will lead to increase in the demand for normal goods, and decrease in income will lead to decrease in the demand for normal goods. With respect to inferior goods have negative relationship with the level of income. And that means as income rises, the demand for inferior goods falls, and that will shift the demand curve of inferior goods to the left. And when income falls, the demand for inferior goods will rise, and that will shift the demand for inferior goods to the right. So the relationship between income and inferior goods is said to be negative, because rise in the level of income will lead to decrease or fall in the demand for inferior goods. And a good example of inferior goods, we have public transportation. Public transportation, you tend to take it less when your income rises, because you will want to get your own private car and all that. And when your income falls, you tend to take public transportation more. So the relationship between income and inferior goods is said to be negative. Fashion taste preference. When fashion moves towards or changes towards a particular goods, or consumer develop taste for a particular goods, or consumers preference a particular goods over another, then the demand for that goods will increase, and that will shift the demand curve for that goods to the right. And when consumers do not develop taste, do not preference a particular goods over another goods, then the demand for that goods will shift to the left, and that will lead to inward shift in the demand curve for that goods. Take for instance, Nigerian youths tend to develop taste, fashion tend to move towards the purchase of iPhone in Nigeria by the youths, and as a result, the demand for iPhone in Nigeria is on the rise, and they seem to preference iPhone over any other phone, except Samsung, which is a kind of close substitute or perfect substitute with iPhone. So, and lastly, we have the number of buyers. When the number of buyers for a particular commodity increases, then the demand for that goods will shift to the right. That will lead to an outward shift in the demand for that goods, and that will shift the demand curve to the right, as said. And when the number of consumers for a particular good decreases, then it will lead to decrease in the demand for that goods, and that will shift the demand curve for that goods to the left. So, in summary, non-price determinants of demand will lead to change in demand, or will lead to change in demand, which will lead to outward shift or leftward shift in the demand curves. So, they are independent of the price of the commodity in question. So when any of them occurs, the demand curve will shift either to the right or to the left. And also, the movements along the demand curve, which occurs primarily by the change in the price of the commodity in question. And downward movements means extension or expansion, and that is because the price of the commodity in question decreases or falls. And upward movement means decrease in quantity demanded, and that is because the price of the commodity in question rises, and that is also called contraction. That's decrease in the quantity demanded for that commodity as a result of the change in the price of the commodity in question. So, at this juncture, I want to say a big thanks to everyone. Let's face facts. The fact that you have watched this video to this end really means you so much love it. Why don't you press the like button? And is this the first, second, third, and fourth video you are watching on our YouTube page? Why don't you push the like, the subscribe button, the notification bell? And that means each time we put out a video, you will be the first to get the video on your gadgets, whatever gadgets you use, perhaps smartphones, laptops, and all that. So, to everyone that has been supportive, keep supporting us. We really appreciate you. And till we meet in our subsequent video, I will see you when you see me. Do have a good one. Bye-bye.